The Alvin self-healing cutting mat has a green side and a black side, and it comes with a 1/2 inch grid printed across the entire surface on both sides, and then there are also 1/8 inch markings along the top and side edges all the way around. I'll admit this is not the most accurate form of getting your dimensions, but there's also a 45 and a 60-degree angle guide along the top here. That's why we've got these interesting lines. Now, before you go and try and wing something with your cutting mat and no ruler, you should be aware that without a ruler, it can be very difficult to get your measurements, because if I take my piece of cardboard and plop it right on top, I can no longer see any of those grid lines. So the most common thing to do is you kind of have your cardboard here and you square up one of the edges with one of those grid lines. Then you can use your ruler and place it along here, and you can like line up the top of your ruler with those grid lines, or just use the ruler that way, because if you put something on top, you can no longer see the line. These Alvin cutting mats come in a lot of different sizes, all the way from 3.5 by 5.5 inches up to 48 by 96 inches. So they can get really big. Mine is an 8.5 by 12 inch version, and it's got 11 inches across the top, because the size of the mat that you might see listed refers to the overall size and not the distance of the marking. So it's a 12-inch mat, but it's only got 10 inches of markings because there's kind of a 1/2 inch margin on either side. A smaller cutting mat like this is going to be better for smaller projects, and it's a little bit more portable, and it works well on a small desk. There are going to be links in the description below to a couple different sizes and places you can look those up. But also, some of the mats come with a hole in the top of them, so you could hang it on a board if you wanted to, and others do not. You'd have to like drill that yourself if you wanted it. One really neat thing that I've discovered about cutting cardboard on a cutting mat is that when you do it, you get a cleaner edge to the cardboard. So if I keep my knife pressed all the way against the cutting mat and cut through, that is going to give me a much like nicer finish along the edge here than if I cut it while I was holding it up in the air, or like on a carpet, or just on this table right here. Also, when you're cutting on a cutting mat, it's easy to tell once your knife has gone through the cardboard and entered the mat. So if I'm here, sometimes if I'm like on a hard table or on another piece of cardboard, it's hard to tell if I've gotten all the way through the cardboard. But here, since it's a little bit soft, when I cut, I can feel that, and it also doesn't provide a ton of resistance against my knife. If I was cutting on top of like a wooden cutting board, once I cut into the wood, it'd be a lot harder to cut. But this way, since it's soft, your knife sinks in and doesn't have as much resistance against it. It also won't slide away. If I'm cutting on something really hard, I risk my knife like suddenly shooting off to the side, so it kind of grips it in that fashion, adds a little bit of safety. And for those of you who struggle to keep your knives sharp, there's good news for you, because when you cut into something soft, your knife does not get dull as fast, so your knives will stay sharper longer when you're using a cutting mat. Alvin makes their cutting mats out of 3 layers, and the center layer is going to be your plastic, and that's a little bit of a harder plastic. Then it moves to a softer, like slightly more spongy, rubbery layer, and that one is, it's still really hard, but softer than any of the other layers. And then on the very top, there's the thinnest layer, and that's a little bit harder again that you cut on top of. The mat is a little bit flexible, but that center piece of plastic keeps it pretty rigid, and I think if I kept bending it like any further than this, I would get a permanent curve, like kind of creased into it. But hey, if you are getting value out of this video, consider smashing the like button. And if we are just meeting, my name is Eli with Maker Brain, where I love to help you access and implement your creativity through hands-on DIY projects. So if that sounds like your kind of jam, then think about subscribing to see more videos like this one. Now, this Alvin cutting mat, and as far as I'm aware, all Alvin cutting mats are proclaimed to be self-healing. But I want to know your thoughts. Do you think self-healing cutting mats are just sort of like an advertising gimmick, or is it a real technology? I'd love to hear what you think down in the comments below. So pause the video, comment there right before I jump into the answer. Now, the truth is, the mat does heal back over your cuts, but it isn't perfect. And the words self-healing might be a little bit of a stretch. I think maybe like cut reducing or cut minimizing would be a better word, because in the end it kind of takes the cuts and makes them into a little bit more like scratches. Supposedly, the mat is made out of a bunch of separate particles compressed into one solid, so that when you cut through it with a knife, It separates the particles but does not cut them. And then once your knife has passed through, the particles reconnect back behind the blade of the knife into a solid once again. Interestingly, with a cutting mat like this, the sharper your knife is, the less of a mark it is going to make on the mat, because it's going to create a thinner line through those particles and they can seal better behind it, whereas if you have a dull knife, you're kind of just crushing everything. Now, when I take a really close look at my mat, I can see that there are some really big scars in it where I've used like a dull knife, but then almost everything is just a scratch. And I do not cut super hard into my mat, but I have had it for several years and it still works perfectly fine. I think that those spongy layers sort of in the middle that I was talking about keep everything pulled back together if you cut through the hard top layer. Don't think about it as something that's really going to heal itself. It'll just keep surviving a long time. And I doubt you're going to absolutely scrap this unless you do an insane amount of cutting and carving. And if you feel ready to get a cutting mat for yourself, I have a link right there in the description. But if not, then go ahead and click on this video right here where I break down the 13 most important tools for makers, and it's possible that those tools will be more important to you than getting a cutting mat, so make sure you check that out, or another video right here by Maker Brain.